Hello and welcome to the second screencast for Sci-Inspire, organizing science fair judging and mentorships. You're about to learn the core process of connecting K-12 educators and their students with university judges and mentors for local science fairs. Science Outreach is the partnerships between K-12 educators and institutions of higher education for the purpose of improving K-12 science education. The overarching goal of Sci-Inspire is to make science outreach easier, enhancing and expanding it across the country. The result, we hope, would amplify the known benefits of science outreach among American youth, improving attitudes towards science, performance in science, and interest in pursuing science careers. One way Sci-Inspire will work, what we'll dive into for the rest of this video, is by connecting educators with science fair mentors and judges. The first step would obviously be training and tutorials, that is, preparing Sci-Inspire participants for the challenges of science outreach partnerships. Now that's certainly part of Sci-Inspire, but not the focus of this video. Instead, let's see how that connection process itself works. When a K-12 educator wants to find Sci-Inspire mentors or judges, the educator first posts a request on the Sci-Inspire website. Here we are at the Sci-Inspire website on the profile of Martha Hudson. Mrs. Hudson is a prototypical 7th grade science teacher at Big Apple Middle School, and it turns out there's a science fair coming up at Big Apple Middle School, and Mrs. Hudson wants to request both mentors and judges. But before she can post her request, Mrs. Hudson wants to see if there's anything on Sci-Inspire's website that could specifically help one of her students, who yesterday told her she'd like to do a project about chemistry. Mrs. Hudson then navigates to the Sci-Inspire resources page, and she finds a science fair template that suits her needs. In this case, it's called Bouncy Sticky Polymers. It's a project that empowers 6th through 8th graders to study polymers by making their own bouncy balls and slime. Mrs. Hudson likes this project template, so she adds it to her favorites. And if we go to her Educator Center, which you can think of as a dashboard of important actions and information for educators, we see that the science fair template that she liked, that she favorited, is associated with her in her list of favorite Sci-Inspire resources. Now she's ready to make her request. In the center section, we see that she has not made any requests yet. She can make one by clicking either Request Classroom Volunteers or Request Science Fair Volunteers. For the purpose of this request, we'll choose Science Fair Volunteers. Here's the request. Let's give it a title. Science Fair Mentors and Judges Needed at Big Apple Middle School. How about a description? We're holding a science fair soon, and it would be great to have help before and during the event. We're expecting 30 student participants, lots of parents, and lots of mess. Again, we're looking for both mentors and judges. It's a science fair, so all subject areas apply. The fair is one day, and let's say December 10th. The time, 1 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. We could have images, but we don't have them now. We could have files, such as an event flyer or some kind of instruction, but we don't have that either. What we do have is a Sci-Inspire resource we want to associate with this project. We'll choose that, Bouncy Sticky Polymers. We'll review what we have written, make sure it's right, and press Save to Post. And there we are. Our request has posted. If we now go to our Educator Center, we see that the request has indeed posted, but no one has indicated interest. Not yet, at least. That leads us to our next step. Once Mrs. Hudson's request posts, Sci-Inspire will automatically match the request with Sci-Inspire volunteers based on subject interest, time availability, and geographical proximity, among other factors. Here's Irene Adler. She's a biochemistry grad student at Empire City University with interests in biology and chemistry. Navigating as Irene to her student center, we find that Sci-Inspire has matched her with a new request. And it's the request of Mrs. Hudson, Science Fair mentors and judges needed at Big Apple Middle. That brings us to our next step. After being matched to the request, the volunteer indicates interest. We're back at Irene's Student Center. Irene clicks on the request. She looks at the date range, the time range, the description, the associated project template. She makes sure it's all okay. Irene learns about Mrs. Hudson. She learns about Mrs. Hudson's middle school. By the way, this is Big Apple Middle School's educator community page. Irene makes sure there's a way to transport herself to this event. And when Irene is satisfied, she goes back to the request and clicks, I'm interested in this request. And we can see that her interest has been submitted. Naturally, the next step in this process is for the educator to be notified of the match and then approve of the match. We're back at Mrs. Hudson's Educator Center. If we refresh, we'll see that now that Irene has indicated interest, Mrs. Hudson sees her as matched with her request. This method ensures that educators only see volunteers who are viable matches ready to get involved. Mrs. Hudson chooses to learn more about Irene. She examines Irene's profile, her Empire City University volunteer team profile, and when satisfied, she goes to Irene's profile and answers the question, would you like this match volunteer to partner with you in the below requests? Yes. And submit. And now we see Irene in the approved column under My Requests. The next step is for the educator and volunteer to plan for the interaction in real time. Here we have the Educator Center of Mrs. Hudson on the left browser window, and the Student Center for Irene on the right browser window. As Mrs. Hudson, let's click on this request. Since Irene is approved for this request, now it's possible to have real-time conversations with her. Both parties have the ability to schedule a conversation, which they could do by clicking on this button right here to bring up a scheduler client that resembles online doodle polls. But let's say both parties have already done that, and right now is the day and time of the scheduled conversation. In this scenario, both parties are logged on and ready to talk. Mrs. Hudson clicks Start Conversation. Irene sees this and opens the conversation. And they start to plan for December 10th, the date of the science fair. Mrs. Hudson says, so nice to talk to you. What are you interested in doing for the upcoming science fair? Mentoring or judging? Irene says, nice to talk to you as well. I was wondering if it were possible to do both. Mrs. Hudson says, maybe. Perhaps you could judge biological projects, but mentor on some physical science projects. On that note, have you looked at the project template I picked out? And the educator and volunteer talk until understanding is reached and both parties are confident about what to expect and how to prepare. Based on such real-time conversations, the volunteer would customize a Sci-Inspire Science Fair project template. For example, the Bouncy Sticky Polymers project template that Mrs. Hudson liked. And then, at the predetermined date, the K-12 science outreach commences. Either the mentoring starts in anticipation of the science fair, or the judging of the projects begins. Trained, prepared, and acquainted, the educator and the volunteer work together to make the experience a success. And with each new request, educators and volunteers round this loop of Sci-Inspire science outreach, and opportunities to unleash positive science role modeling are greatly expanded and streamlined for everyone. To learn more about Sci-Inspire, go to our info site, www.sci-inspire.org. Together, let's build a brighter future for science in America.